Modern cars work on their own network, and sometimes it's handy to be able to go in there, figure out what's going on, and possibly analyze that data so it can be used in a different way. So we're going to dive into the CAN bus. Hey everybody, welcome back to the garage, and as always, make sure and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. That way you don't miss out. You can ring that bell if you want any of the notifications whenever new videos come out or whenever we go live. We do a lot of giveaways on the live shows, and we have one every week at Thursday, 8 Eastern. Sometimes we do one on the weekend also. So you don't want to miss out your chance to win. Since we just broke 10,000 subscribers, there's going to be a pretty good giveaway on the next live show. So make sure that you ring that bell. On top of it, throw a thumbs up. That helps me out. That's payment enough for me for doing all of this work, sharing this information, and trying to help you guys out. But I'll be honest with you, you guys help me out as much as I help you out. You expose me to new information, new problems, new solutions. I can't do it without you guys. This is a community. The garage as a whole is a community. So I just want to take a moment to thank everybody that participates. Make sure and hit up the comments if you got any questions, solutions, answers. But today we are diving into the CAN bus, and it's a little bit of a weird situation, misnomer kind of stuff. Everybody thinks the CAN bus is a protocol. It's not necessarily a protocol. OBD2 is actually a protocol, and that defines things like message ID, message format, header links, all that kind of stuff. We're going to actually go in, connect up to one of the E67s that I have, use the microchip USB CAN bus analyzer. I love their devices. They're a little bit pricey, about $100, but you need a good device that works well. And I have a lot of good experience with the microchip LIN bus analyzer from whenever I did the heated seat retrofit on the Super Auto. And the whole idea is to go in, see what information is being passed, and then try and figure out what that information is. And I'll let you in on a little hint as to why we're doing this. The idea behind it is that the Holley EFI systems talk in their own protocol. Well, if we can figure out how the ECM on the factory one talks to the gauge cluster, we should be able to then take the ECM or the Holley EFI stuff, decipher the code, use another device to convert from one message format to the other, and then have a cheap solution for using a factory gauge cluster on something like a Holley EFI, or for that matter, any aftermarket ECU that has CAN bus communications. And here's kind of what's going on there. GM, Ford, Chrysler, Nissan, all these guys have OBD2 as a protocol that you can hook up into the port underneath, see that information. A lot of those parameters that we're looking for are what are called broadcast parameters, and so the ECM's always sending it out to the network. That information is just being blasted constantly, and you'll see that as soon as we hooked up. I've got the bench harness set up with the ECM out of it, so we are just looking for the broadcast messages. There's probably going to be about 15 or so, and then we'll try and decipher which broadcast messages. There's no guarantee that the broadcast messages are the ones that are being used for the gauge cluster in this situation. All we can do is decipher those messages and then use the device to go onto the network without the ECM, inject those messages onto the CAN bus network, and see if the gauge cluster responds. Now, modern vehicles have what is considered a gateway on their network. Generally, it's a BCM, but in this case, we actually have a vehicle communications interface. And the reasoning behind that is that the gauge cluster itself is not on the high-speed bus. It's on the low-speed bus. So you have a high-speed bus, which is your CAN network, and then a lot of vehicles have a low-speed bus, which is often the LIN bus network. So that vehicle communications device is actually taking the information on the CAN bus network, changing it over to the low-speed network, and then providing it to things like the gauge cluster or anything else that needs that data that's on the low-speed bus. So the idea or the theory is we can take these messages that are being broadcast by the ECM, break them down, and then we can try and replicate them and see how things respond without the ECM hooked up while we're injecting it straight through the CAN port. So let's dive over to the setup where we can pull everything up. I can show you the logs, stuff like that, and we'll go from there. Okay, real quick, I just want to show you what we're working with. We've got our bench harness set up. We've got the bench harness set up to power up the ECM with the standard communication ports on here. And then I've got OBD2 adapters for both of these, and so I'm just strictly jumpering the high and low CAN networks together through these adapters by jamming pins in here. And then here's our microchip USB analyzer. I'm using the terminal ports. It has a DB9 option on there if you want to build out a DB9 connector to OBD2 or something like that. So that being said, I'm going to pull off the screen now and we're going to dive into this information. Okay, first things first, I've got the OBD2 PIDs list pulled up here. We're going to see if anything shows up on here. Specifically, we will be looking at PID addresses, and we're going to work in decimal because it's a little bit easier. Hex, if you're a programmer, will make more sense to you, but if you're not, we're going to be scrubbing through and trying to find these parameter IDs in decimal. Now, I've got the CAN bus analyzer software pulled up. This is pretty straightforward. This is not the fanciest. There is fancy software out here, but this is the one that comes with the analyzer itself, so it's free. That's why we're using it, and it should give us the information that we need. Now, the first thing that we need to do is go into setup and do the hardware setup and adjust the bit rate control. This is a 500 kbs CAN bus network on this particular platform. It might be a 250 on some of the older ones if you're trying to do this, but modern ones are going to be 500. Normal mode is perfectly fine for right now, and then bus termination. We have bus termination on because at the last device on the CAN network needs to have a 60 ohm bus termination. On your GM platforms, your BCM is going to have a 60, and then your ECM, which is always the last device on the network, is going to have a 60 on there. Also, that being said though, you only need the 60 ohm to talk. So if you take the ECM off the CAN bus network, it will still talk, but if the BCM's off of it, it will not talk without a resistor on that network. So that's kind of the reason why this network will work in a way that it is self-diagnosing or fault tolerant, basically. So whenever we end up doing away with the factory ECM, it'll be perfectly fine because the BCM will still be on there. It has the proper termination, and you don't actually have to have a return because it is a two-wire network. It transmits on one, receives on the other wire. So all that being said, we've got this set up now. I'm going to go ahead and turn on our bench analyzer, and we've got two options here. We got rolling trace and fixed trace. Rolling trace is going to show us the data as it comes in. Let's go ahead and open that up. And this is literally everything that the ECM is sending out right now. And the nice thing about having the bench harness is we can only see the ECM. Now, if we were to hook onto the OBD2 port of the car and do this, we would be inundated with a ton of data. So being able to isolate data like this is great. And the cool thing about this device having the ability to do termination, you can isolate individual modules, find the wiring pinouts, figure out where the ignition power is, where the switch power is, and where the CAN communication lines are, and you can sniff individual devices to get the information that they're broadcasting. Now remember, this is just a broadcast. There is a poll request and return information out there in which the VCIM or the BCM are going to actually say, hey, I need this parameter. Same ordeal if you hook up your HP tuners or your Tech 2. That thing knows, hey, I want to see this parameter that's not a broadcast parameter. It actually has to send a message out there and say, hey, give me that information, and then the end device responds with it. Now, that's another way that we could do it is we could jump in on a network with the HP Tuners scanner on and scan specific parameters that are not broadcast parameters and sniff that network on the bench harness, and we should be able to see the command and response off of those. Once again, it's not going to guarantee us that it is the message that we need to interface with other devices, but that is the one that is for OBD2. The question that's going to be that we have to answer on this is whether or not the OBD2 format data is the one that is being translated in the communications module and then being sent out on the low-speed bus. So now that we've got this pulled up, we're actually going to close the rolling one on here and open up the fixed trace. This one's going to work a little bit easier for what we're looking at. This shows us all of the IDs that are being broadcast. So 201 is a good one to start at. We're going to come over here, scroll down through our list and see what 201 is, and it's not on this list. So that's very interesting. Let's flip it over to Hex, see if it matches up with something on this list. Can't remember where to do that. Oh, View. Go over here, show ID in Hex. So 0xC9, see if it aligns with anything on here, and it may not. 0xC9, nope. So let's just do the old Google search and see 0xC9. We'll try PID. So once again, this is something that we're going to have to dive into and try and figure out what it is, because the information is not readily available, which kind of sucks. I was hoping that we would be able to find most of the PIDs on here that we were looking for, but it doesn't look like. We go out to C4. Now, here is the data itself. It is broken up into blocks of messages that is then brought together to show us what it is. We can see what the most active stuff is based on the counter. This is polling a lot. Down here at the bottom, we've got a couple that are not polling quite as often. Now, looking at what we're getting right now where we have active data, there's a couple assumptions that we can make. There's two of these that are actually working right now. The rest of them are reading in, but the data's flatlined. So there's a good chance that those are engine parameters that are the flatlined ones. And then 201 and 272 can be something like communication status or checksums. And then one of them might just be voltage. So there's really no way to tell in the format that the data is in right now. But what we can do is possibly, let's try hooking up HP tuners on this and see if we can't jump in on this network somewhere and sniff the network while HP tuners is working on it. Okay, so I went ahead and soldered on some flying leads on the bench harness to hook up the microchip analyzer, and now we've got the MPVI2 on the OBD2 port. So what we're going to do is open up the scanner, clear out the parameters, and maybe add one or two parameters and see how the data looks whenever we're scanning parameters using a end device. Okay, let's go ahead and open up our rolling trace, or actually our fixed trace here, see that we're getting data. We have additional parameters in here. See, these parameters down here are coming from the HP tuners. Very interesting to see right away that we have some data. Wish you could expand this window out. If you're watching Microchip, figure out a way to expand the window out. So let's go ahead and open up the scanner here. We'll connect up and then we're going to clear out the parameter list. Okay, there we got a new parameter coming in as we connect. It's requesting the PIDs from the ECM. Okay, interesting, interesting, interesting. See, the arrows on here determine whether or not this is a request or a broadcast parameter. The ones with one arrow is a broadcast, the others are request. Let's clear these out. We're looking for engine RPM. And we should be pulling engine RPM in as a broadcast, which means there shouldn't be a new request on this whenever we start scanning. Now, what we can do is go in here, start messing with some of these parameters and sending new messages and seeing if it changes what we're seeing in engine RPM. That's how we can determine kind of what we're looking at here. So let's drag this down and we will open up transmit, and we're going to look for decimal ID 288, DLC 8, and 226, 213, 152, 65, 52, 2, and then 168. We don't know what this is. We can drop our period down. Let's see, let's repeat this 100 times. 1 millisecond. Oh, got to go out to 100. Okay. And this is just sending the same information that we're already putting out on there. So it's not going to necessarily change anything. But if we change the data, we're going to mess with the last format Let's take it out to 256 if it likes that. It might be outside the range. 255. Okay, so it's 0 to 255 instead of 1 to 256. And we're not seeing any changes on the RPM, so that is probably not our RPM parameter. So we can go ahead and stop that one. Now we'll move down to the 368 one. Okay, so we didn't have any luck, so I've gone in, changed our parameter over to SAE, which is a poll and respond. I've got the poll here of 1296. That is the HP tuner's actually polling it. You can see the poll rate there. Let's slow down the poll rate. You'll see what I'm talking about. We're on 5 hertz. Let's make it 10 seconds. So we'll start recording that, and then let's clear our trace out here. And we're looking for a very slow poll. So 2016, empty header message, polling, we're returning 2024. Let's see if we can come in here, full 2024, into thinking it is something it's not. 250, 250, 250, 250, 250, 250, and send. So we finally found the RPM reply parameter on this. It is 1512 is the ID, and you can see that it's fighting with, here, I'll show you what. Let's update this. We'll go back down to 100 hertz, start recording, and send the data, see if it'll hit it. You can see it blinking over whenever we're injecting on the network. Every once in a while it's catching it. We're fighting against the ECM to transmit data at the same time, so every once in a while we get a blip. That's where we're injecting the information on this parameter. So we know that the request is 1512.8.254 with open data from data 1 through data 7. That is the poll request. This gets the response, and so this is what we're looking at for SAE RPM. So if we poll SAE RPM, we're going to get that data back. I don't think that that's the one that we're looking for still. We're looking for the broadcast one, but that being said, maybe, I don't know about the DLCs. I just don't know enough about OBD2 that I'm just going to have to keep on doing some digging and see what the DLC parameters line up with. Let's add both on here. And I doubt it makes a difference, but okay. We're getting the top one. So we're looking for something that is in the same format as this 1512. Good chance that this 1040 is probably going to be it. So let's try and mimic the 1040 now. And I'm going off the fact that it is the format, the message format looks the same as the one that we're sending out. So if I come in here and let's make it match the same all the way across, maybe we can get the same numbers popping up for both. So we'll start broadcasting these both at the same time. Okay, we're getting the first one, but we're not getting the second one. We might have an issue getting the second one because of the poll speed on the ECM, how fast it's actually sending that data. I don't think that we have control over that. We can try and bump it out a little bit, see if it makes a difference. Still getting the first one. This thing's just sending out a multitude of messages faster than we can inject messages on here. I don't think that we can lower the period on this to try and beat it. See if it'll let us do 10. No. Now let's see if we disconnect this. Okay, so there is, we're still connected up on the HP tuners. Now that we've disconnected it, we can send this message without getting interrupted. HP tuners is not crapped out yet, surprisingly. So this gives us the ability, now that we've got a list of these parameters, that we can come in here and try and figure out what's going on some of these possibly. We know that 1512 is the one that we wanted for this one. And if we come in here and zero this out, 1512 should now zero out on our scanner. There it goes. So we can stop that and we can put in 125 here, see how many RPMs that bumps us to. Nothing. Keep on adding numbers till we start seeing numbers. And it might be backwards. Might need to start at the data 1. Okay, there's 8,000 RPMs. Once again, we will duplicate this message, see if we can't get a reading on the broadcast. So 1040 is not going to be the broadcast that we thought it was. Unfortunately, looking through here, I don't want to necessarily clear the trace. Okay, we found it. 272 is our broadcast RPM value in here. So as you can see, let's go ahead and zero out our top one, 125. We can go 0, 0, 0, see if this gets us a 0. Okay, now we got our 0 on our pull and request one. If we do the same for 272, 401, sorry, it was 401, that is it. We do the same on 401, zero this out, and send it. Well, I thought I had it. Okay, we got 201. 201 is our parameter. We've got our pull and request RPM parameter. Now we have our broadcast RPM parameter. So if we come in here on our 254 and we put some false data in here, or our 1512, I'm sorry. Just make it 120 across the board. Okay, we got 7710 RPMs. So we're going to try and do the same thing, see if we can match it up. Now you notice this data is not as long. So that is because it's a broadcast data would be my guess. There it is, 7710. So we figured out that this data 0 is on a pull request, probably the device that's requesting it, 254. If I were to put in here 233 and zero this out, we'll see if it updates on HP tuners properly. And it doesn't, because a different device is requesting this information now. So that's where we need the address. The 254 is, hey, device 254 is requesting this information from you. Now that if I change this over to 254 and send it, we should go to 0 on it. There we go, we went to 0. So 254 is HP tuners, the MPVI request message, and that is why this data format is actually longer. You see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 data parameters in the fields. This is the message broken down because we're looking at very small integers, 8-bit integers, 0 to 255. So because of that, we're using 8-bit integers. To get a number over 255, we have to use multiple 8-bit integers in a row as a full message to get the RPMs that we're looking for. Now that we know that, we don't necessarily care about deciphering the information. We're not trying to take the 8-bit integer and break it down per se right now. We're just trying to make sure that we can figure out which input and what output, and as I said, the broadcast ones. That's going to be the important one, because now we can go over to the car and use the broadcast transmit feature and try and transmit a broadcast message to see if the ECM looks at. But for one, we don't want to go to 7,700 RPM, so let's drop this down. We'll put 100 in each of them. We don't have to put an address in data 0 because this is a broadcast message, so we're just using the 7 fields here to put output data, sending it, and that gets us to 6425. Let's drop it down a little bit more. We'll just put 50 in everything. $32.13, that's a good parameter to work with. I'm going to go get set up in the car and we'll try it from there. Okay, so I've got this kind of set up in a precarious situation, but you're going to be paying attention to the screen more than anything. Just because I don't have an adapter to hook into the OBD2 port directly on the port for here. And so you can see I've got the messages pulled up right now, just a lot of data coming across. This is just the data that is naturally on this bus right now with all the end devices. So I'm going to inject this And yeah, it's not working, unfortunately. I was hoping that it would be good enough to go over to the gauge cluster, but that just means that we are not transmitting data on the broadcast channel to the gauge cluster. Not surprised. Now, there's some different ways that we can go about working with this. In particular, we can try using the Tech 2 or the VX Diag setup, connect it up and sniff it while we're trying to send messages, because you might be able to send messages to the gauge cluster to do sweep and things like that through the Tech 2. So that might be our best bet of trying to figure out which message is going there. But we're getting it narrowed down. That's what's important. Okay, at the risk of making this video too long, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for now, but there will be more data on this in the future. Rest assured. I'm going to go through and do some more diagnosis and sniffing on the network, see if I can figure out how the messages are getting translated over to the low speed to get to the gauge cluster. And if I figure that out, I will do an update and let you guys know. Eventually, we should be able to sort all this out. It just takes a lot of time, patience, and just work. That's all it is. So I'm going to jump back into it. Remember, ABT, always be tuning, and I'll see you guys soon.